everyone, Richelle here. The Venice Architecture Biennale has officially opened, and I'm so excited today to be interviewing the curator and presenters of the Canadian Pavillion, David Theodore, Tom Balaban, and Jennifer Thorogood of TVA. This year's thematic for the Canadian Pavillion is Imposter Cities. Imposter Cities is about architectural identity, and it's about faking it. It explores how Canadian buildings and cities double as other places in film and television. Let's wait and welcome them to the interview. Hello.
Hi, how's it going?
Very good. Very, very good.
Where are you?
I'm in Hamilton.
Uh-huh.
Where are you?
I'm in Montreal.
Oh, okay. How's the weather? It's really beautiful in Ontario.
Yeah, it's very nice today. It's not hot yet. It was hot a couple of weeks ago and then it got normal, but the heat is coming back.
That's good.
Well, it could be. I live in Old Montreal, and there's been kind of gang turf wars being carried out in Old Montreal. Plus, everybody, because we just dropped curfew, everybody wants to come down and go for a walk. So there's cars zooming around and motorcycles zooming around and traffic jams and people getting shot and all sorts of stuff.
Jeez.
Yeah.
That is not the new normal we were looking for coming out of the pandemic.
Well, it kind of is. It's the people want to be active. They want to go places. They want to see things. And some of it's very artificial that you can't. So, for example, we have, I live in front of one of the old grain silos. And so young people, usually men, like to go inside and climb up on the roof. And they like to go up on the roof and set off fireworks. So it's very dangerous. There's a train track down below, and sometimes they throw their fireworks down onto the train tracks in front of the planes. And I don't think anyone's been killed inside for a long time. They wouldn't let us know if they did, but you know, it's exuberance, let's say.
Do you know if Tom is joining us, or is it just the two of us? Okay.
Should be.
Just wait for him to join. Were you able to go to Venice to do any of the installation, or
no? Well, the Canadian government has stopped all non-essential travel still. So we can't go and represent Canada in Venice. That's not considered essential. The Biennale people told us they'd write us a letter saying how essential it was.
Oh, you should have taken that.
Oh, I don't know. It's one of those strange things. Do you really want to be setting up an international Biennale and having people coming around from around the world in the middle of a global pandemic? I mean, it may feel like it's ending, but most of the world, it's not ending at all. So it's a very strange decision. And the Canadian government has at least been consistent in saying, well, no one can, like, it's not like some shows could go and some others couldn't do this. Like, I work for a university and it's the same thing. I'm not allowed to even go anywhere and use university money without having a real reason to do it and going through a whole bunch of paperwork and so on. And, you know, craving a cappuccino in Piazza San Marco doesn't quite mean
it's not essential yet. Yeah. Not essential yet for us. Well, I guess we'll just keep waiting for Tom to join.
Sure. I know that they're doing 10 things at once, but I'll see if they're
can only imagine.
Yeah, they've been exemplary in their kind of putting the project together and making sure things get done. Really, really good at it.
Does not seem to be working. We'll log out and log back in. That usually seems to work.
Sounds good. I love how that's always the solve for any IT. We'll just turn it off and turn it on again.
Yeah, it's the world is changing that way, and there are effects for architecture. I was just discussing with somebody the effects. We're kind of haven't even really learned what to do about the fax machine. In other words, when the change when you could send a visual instantaneously rather than just a text description. we still are, thinking of what architects do in that very old way.
Very, very true. Hello.
Hi.
Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time to do this little interview. I appreciate it. Where are you guys zooming in from?
Montreal.
Oh, both of you.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh. I'm in Hamilton.
David's in the next room.
Love it. Socially distant. Love it. Love it. Well, I guess we'll just get started. Can you guys quickly just introduce yourselves?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm Tom Balaban. Jennifer Thorogood.
Or
I'm
introduce one
Jennifer
another.
Yeah.
And I'm David Theodore. I'm technically the curator of the exhibition.
And Tom and Jennifer, what are your official titles or capacity?
The office is the presenting partner? No, presenter.
Presenter.
Tom is the project manager, and I was project designer.
Oh, okay.
We, as David kind of has alluded to, we all are doing everything.
Everything.
Yeah.
Like everyone usually does.
Yeah.
Love it. So my first question is, I'm so curious, how does one get chosen to represent Canada at the Venice Biennale?
It's a competition. Like everything else you apply for.
You apply for the competition.
And there was actually a very good jury this year, which was, I won't say surprising, but usually it's a mixed bag. This time they had a very nice balanced jury between architects, curators, people involved with international exhibitions, architects who've exhibited. So it was people who knew both what the Biennale was about, and then who also had a good idea about what Canadian architecture and international architecture is about. So it was a very balanced jury. So when we were selected, we were super happy because we respect the people on the jury, and we were kind of proud of the fact that we had been selected.
Yeah, so it's two-stage. There's you send in your idea, and then they selected a few teams for a second stage to present to the jury.
Okay.
And then we were selected from that. And I would say one of the things why we were selected that Tom and Jen put together for us was a really solid collaboration. So we had marketing and graphics and so on kind of lined up, as opposed to just a vague idea of what we were going to do. So I've never participated in a organized proposal like that before, and I do still hold that those parts of the presentation were also key. So it's a very good idea, I think, our exhibition, but the teamwork coordinated by TBA shouldn't be underestimated.
Mm-hmm. So it was a pretty fleshed out idea, I guess. Is that what you're saying? That just could have been one of the reasons why?
I was trying to say fleshed out team.
Fleshed out team.
And this was the first time the Canada Council for the Arts has approached the Biennale this way. Before, they just there was one submission and they would pick someone. So, I was going to say this year, but we started 2018 is when we submitted the very first proposal.
Wow. Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's kind of crazy. Yeah.
And then so because the theme for the Biennale isn't really announced before you create the content. So what was the process behind that? A little bit of a chicken and egg kind of thing happening.
Yeah, well, some countries, especially the ones that are further away, the teams get selected just because of logistics and shipping and preparations before the theme is announced. So there's always a moment where you kind of take a theme that you think is important or appropriate at this point in time, and you try and kind of see how parts of it best reflect the theme that's announced. But generally, you know, you're looking at questions in architecture, themes that are pertinent. So it happens naturally that the questions that the curator would ask would somehow lend themselves well to the questions that the participants would ask, because, I mean, there are kind of global questions about architecture. So
the technical answer is that the national pavilions aren't curated by the theme. The curator is not in control of the themes of the national pavilions. That's why they're national. They get to choose what their own themes are. But the Biennale doesn't do a very good job of distinguishing that the national pavilions are not necessarily responding to the theme. That's historically how it's set up. They're two separate parts of one exhibition. So there's no, the pandemic in this case played into a sense of more coherence among the national pavilions than there might be in a normal year, which is that it was another whole year to think about what the question was and orient your pavilion towards the question, the curator's question. If it had opened a year earlier, there would have been even more confusing that not every national pavilion seemed to be on theme. And I don't know why the Biennale doesn't explain that better in their marketing.
I see. So that's why this year it seems a very coherent theme across all exhibitions and pavilions, because people had that extra year to kind of craft.
Well, the question seemed to, I don't know, the question seemed to fit the year, right? How will we live together seemed to fit a pandemic year. And just, it kind of all lines up. But if the question had been, you know, something about tectonics or something, I don't know that everybody would have changed their or oriented their explanations of their pavilions, as Tom was suggesting, towards the theme as much.
In many countries like ourselves, we shipped everything in 2020. So our exhibition had been sitting in Venice for a year.
So that was my next process. That was my next question. What was the process behind creating the exhibition? So you guys had to ship it ahead of time. And before you joined, David was talking about how, you know, you guys weren't able to go because of the whole pandemic, and this is an essential. So tell us about that process.
Of not going?
Going and shipping the content and watching it from afar.
Well, we had rushed to, just kind of working backwards from when we had to set up, we had rushed to ship it right about the time that, or just before the lockdown happened here in Canada, and just before the Biennale had announced that they were postponing it until August. So at that point, we were still kind of working towards an August date. Our exhibition was shipped and we were expecting to go, and we had kind of moved our installation to August. And then obviously it was postponed for a full year. So it's been a lot of kind of these steps of scenarios of, okay, not August, then the spring. Is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? So there was a lot of kind of guessing and scenarios and kind of rethinking. If this happens, then we'll do this. If that happens, then we'll do that. All the while kind of keeping an eye on numbers, what's going on in the world, every country. I think David might have mentioned that all the curators, for the first time in the history of, I won't say the history of the Biennale, but in the recent history of the Biennale, the curators got together online and started to also kind of think about this as a whole. The commissioners of the various pavilions also got together as a whole. So there were all of these kinds of discussions that were happening, and everyone was keeping an eye on what everybody else was doing, what the news was, what the situation in Italy was, what the situation in every country was, because I mean, there's two kind of constraints to juggle. So I mean, I think possibly if we could have found a way to be there with a lot of acrobatics and a lot of letters and a lot of dubious kind of traveling, but I think we decided that it was probably not a good idea to go, and under the circumstances.
Wow.
So
David, can you-
hopefully we'll get to see it.
Yes,
Yes, yes,
I think we all
hopefully.
want to see it. David, can you speak more about those roundtables that you were having with other curators? I find that interesting because I think historically that would never happen, right? You would never get that opportunity.
So, Tom, is it collective or collaborative? Curators Collective.
Collective.
So there's a website you can look up, curatorscollective.org. And it was exactly as Tom was explaining. When no one was quite sure whether the Biennale would announce a postponement, Haewon Shin from the Korean Pavilion, whose own project is a bit about how do you organize people from the bottom up, started contacting the other curators, and eventually we had about 30 or 40, and we were going to have our own press conference announcing what we thought we might want the Biennale to do. And a week before ours, the Biennale convened a conference and announced that it would be postponed. But the initial conversations were, as Tom said, it's kind of surprising. Normally you meet the other curators as you're setting up, and you go to have a beer or borrow some screwdrivers or something from them. But in this case, we had a whole year of meeting once a month, talking to each other, seeing what was going on. There's a plan. If you go to the site, you'll see some signage that's in common. There's a plan for some possible panel discussions and things like that, and maybe an event. So it's the first time, and that's what I mean saying that it's not normal that the pavilions all work together like that, which lines up nicely with the question of the curator, how will we live together? One of the ways is, well, we get together and we start doing stuff. It's been quite positive. The hope would be to leave something robust enough that curators next time would also be able to benefit from that kind of back and forth before they get there.
Well, that's really beautiful. So now on to Imposter Cities. I love the little thematic that has come from it. My one question is, do you think there's a larger cultural identity that Canadians are really good at faking it and adapting to whatever we need to within the world?
You want to take that? I mean, I think we do. No.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. But
I think we've
yeah, I
been.
don't know.
I think we've been convinced a little bit by David Cronenberg, who says that ability to fake it is a good thing.
Yes.
You know, it's a positive trait that you are able to change into something else and not just insist on your own identity all the time.
Yeah, we also have a lot of resources to draw on, you know, or whether it's cultural resources or physical resources, you know, from our landscape to, you know, our culture. If we really wanted to kind of dig a little deeper than the surface, there's a lot of richness that you can kind of patch together and recombine and reconfigure in a lot of different ways that makes people here a lot more adaptable. We're also, I think, in a way used to being, trying to find a politically correct way of saying, not a secondary culture, but in a way a culture that's always, or a series of cultures or a group of cultures that also has the weight of a kind of dominant, mythologized American neighbor or European kind of heritage that is not necessarily ours. I mean, it's definitely not ours for the most part as Canadians, but we're used to always having that other, larger other to work against. So moving around the world and in different places, we've become very used to kind of that negotiation with a dominant other. So whether, you know, we go travel or we work in a different country or we present our country and through media and through art, there's always that kind of understanding that you're negotiating with something else, and we've become very good at that, I think.
But also, bringing up travel. When you travel, I mean, it used to be a thing to make sure you had a Canadian flag, you know, on your backpack or whatever.
Even
And-
if you were American.
yeah, just because you did not want people to think you were American.
True.
So yeah, so it's funny, outside of our country, we're like, we're Canadian. We are Canadian.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah.
So would love for you guys to, I don't know how we can do that, but are you guys able to screen share and walk me through the website at least to kind of show me the exhibition and how you brought it all together? Or is it easier just to speak about it?
I think it's probably easier to speak about it. Maybe David can speak to it a little bit more detail, but I think we wanted the website to be an experience as a way for especially people who can't go to Venice right now, like us, to experience not the exhibition itself, but a version of the exhibition. So there are different components from the exhibition that come together in a kind of random way. So you'll see interviews commingled with camera views of the kind of the screening room at the center of the pavilion, with different juxtapositions of the films in which these imposter buildings happen, some on-location shooting, some more textual description. So all of it kind of comes together in a random way, and you can kind of work your way or swim through this 9x9 grid of the pieces of the exhibition and kind of come to your own personal experience and conclusion. So it's trying not to be didactic about it, but having each person find their own way through the content. I don't know, maybe Davey, you've been working on it a lot longer than the rest of us.
Some sleepless nights, but the issue I think is to think of it that so from the very beginning, we were thinking about multiple audiences. We really wanted to wrap the pavilion so that if people visited Venice but didn't go inside, still knew that it was about cinema and architecture and this question of myth making and fictional worlds and faking it and so on. So the website was always a possibility to further that. How can we get people who will never visit Venice to still get some idea of how architecture and cinema go together or don't go together, and especially work on this kind of myth making and nation building and identity and authenticity. In the end, it's the best experience, but I still think it's not because of COVID. We were always trying to figure out, well, how can we fake it? Like, what's the best way to get people to understand architecture through a screen? So the screening room itself plays with that. We've turned it into a kind of a mini city that you can walk in of stills from a movie, and you can kind of turn a corner. You can walk around inside of these movies. And then when you put it back on screen, it's a little harder to get that. But the idea is that you're kind of peeking into that world where architecture is cinema, as opposed to these buildings that get filmed. And you can get a pretty good feel anyway, maybe I'm too close to it, but I think people's responses have been that they get that idea from fooling around with it.
Is there, I was looking on the website, I noticed that there's a AR element. Is that what's happening live in Venice? Like, you can actually put something up against the green screen and interact with it that way as well?
Yes, yeah. So yeah, we wanted that experience in Venice for the exterior. So the exterior is wrapped in the green screen to kind of highlight the quirkiness of the building, but it also serves to erase it digitally. So when you're there, physically, it kind of has a presence. As soon as you put your camera up and you use the Instagram app, it disappears and it becomes a virtual experience. And it's really interesting to see people make that switch. Like the building no longer exists for them. It's like all of a sudden it becomes an experience. And the very first experience we have in Venice, because it will switch throughout the Biennale, is we worked with an artist, Alison Moore, as well as a group of 3 Canadians in New York, Jane, Whitney, and Ava, who did the Instagram app for us. And our first one is we put together we wanted to create these fake scenes. So we took some kind of real elements. So the year leading up to the Biennale, Tom and I did some traveling, and we went, we were in Vancouver, and we took some video footage of SFU. So we have the SFU footage, and then we started adding elements from the movie. So we have a giant spider in the background, and then David's favorite thing, that the buildings blow up. So the very first experience in Venice is SFU blowing up with a giant spider attacking it.
Oh, that's amazing. So I can only imagine the amount of hours gone through film to try and recognize what was actually shot in a Canadian city. So how long did that take, like creating the content and curating that content? Because I think all of us have the big films that have been produced, but it seems like there is way more that we don't even know about.
Yeah, we say this number 3,000, but I think it's even actually more that we, in some way or another, crawled through. Some part of the team watched some part of some video to get through them all. But there's way more, and I don't know. One of the questions has always been this idea of the imposter building. Like, which are the buildings that really get used a lot, and why do they get reused for films? So at a certain point, we started to concentrate on those ones as much as we could. But individual rooms of individual buildings, there's just a ton of them. The universities have, so University of Toronto, McGill University, University de Montreal, Simon Fraser. For some reason, those are great filming places. Jen and Tom, do we really have an answer for why? But
I mean, I think the ones that interested us the most were the ones that were so different from the way that we imagine them as architects. So those are the ones that stood out the most. There's a whole other series that are buildings that no longer exist. That kind of recorded through film, and Mirabel Airport here in Montreal is one of the classics. So those are kind of a second wave of buildings that interested us. And then after that, there's just kind of this kind of geeky drive to try and find them all. So, you start looking, and there's so many resources online. People will come and tell you automatically. The moment you mention the project, people will all of a sudden start to tell you all the ones in their neighborhood. So that's another level of kind of collecting. I mean, it's gotten so crazy to the point now we can't watch a movie or a TV show without thinking that's a Canadian city for sure, and then trying to figure out which one.
You're like, that's good. That's
it's like a disease that we have now.
Yeah. That's a great game to play. Like, that's a Canadian building. Name that Canadian building, or name that Canadian city.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, although most of the time they are actually, you look it up, and it is actually the street that you thought.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, especially Netflix now, because we've all been watching so much of streaming services, and streaming services more often than not shoot in Canada, Vancouver and some of the smaller cities.
Mm-hmm.
Toronto, I think, is too expensive. So more often than not, they are actually Canadian cities.
Yeah.
That we see.
Yeah, the other way we didn't end up organizing this way, but we thought about it for a long time, is if you're not from Canada and you don't know what any of these buildings are, you might recognize the movie even so, right, and then have this kind of shock of recognition. Hey, I would never have thought that was Canada. So the one that I like is Superman, because Super Baby lands in Alberta, not in the United States. It's just, it wasn't exactly an imposter city, but there's a number of those where people will recognize the film scene more than they will recognize the city. And we preferred, I think in the end, the imposter buildings to that other kind of recognition. But I think people who aren't from Canada would also enjoy the other geeky game of that's not because they recognize the street, it's the exact opposite. They would never have thought it would have been a Canadian one, even though they're very familiar with the movies. Brokeback Mountain as well, I guess, is like that. Like, it's not obvious that it's not filmed in the US, but it isn't. So there's Canada being adaptable again.
So my next question is then, what are some of your favorite films that have been shot in Canada but are an imposter on film? So that now that you have a 3,000 database of movies, are there a couple that, spark
Favorites?
favorites?
Yeah, this is gonna be really bad to say because it's such a horrible movie. But there's a 2008 kind of remake of Death Race that I love. It takes place on this racetrack in this prison called Terminal Island. That's actually kind of a Frankenstein, pun intended, of 3 different locations in Montreal that have been kind of amalgamated into an island that doesn't exist. One is the grain silos, in fact, that David lives very close to. Another one is a prison in Laval, and the third one is a studio in Point St. Charles, kind of an old warehouse that they kind of amalgamated together and rebuilt into this kind of seamless prison / car racetrack. That it's ugly, it's horrible, the movie's not great, but just that kind of Frankensteining of everything together, that kind of movie magic and building the story around this place that doesn't exist with places that do exist, I find unbelievably fascinating. Yeah.
You have to, another not good movie.
I'm starting to see a theme here with film shot in Canada.
But it was interesting to watch because being in Montreal was Get Smart, and a remake that Montreal plays Washington, Moscow, LA, and one other, Paris, I think.
Wow, that's impressive.
All within a block at sometimes, you recognize, you're like, oh, they're on that street, then they turn the corner and then they're in Moscow. So I found that one entertaining to watch because all of the areas, how it changed instantaneously. Just because they have a sign or something that said Moscow.
Yeah, you just put an overlay that says Washington and
yeah, it's Washington.
it's Washington. The bad of the bad are the Hallmark movies, which Canada makes a lot of. And we ended up not including them because, for lots of reasons, but those are the ones that I watch kind of as background wallpaper, where you can see all these places that are called Texas. And that's it. There, the interesting thing is that theme of these are supposed to be quintessential American life, and somehow they can be filmed in Ottawa and Kamloops and Winnipeg. It's very strange. And then the other one, which the video editing sometimes does a very good job, and the screen editing, is just how beautiful some of the images are. So it's not about so much about the impostering as the light and the color and the movement of the filmmaking. So the Guillermo del Toro films, where Toronto plays Tokyo or something, are they're not bad films. Those ones are good films. And there are some of those that are mixed up in there too. But somehow it's the weird ones that, there's Wishmaster 4, where the guy appears suddenly through a portal and so on, or some Star Trek where they use a Shim Sutcliffe house and some blue light spinning around, and it's that Frankenstein thing Tom was trying to say. Why would you think you need to do that, and how does it work, and why isn't the real world good enough for your story?
And the best ones, definitely, in the best ones, the street scenes and the buildings are characters in the film, and I think that's kind of the strongest ones. So the Guillermo del Toro ones, for sure, I think so much of the film, the narrative is kind of underpinned by the character of the spaces, the character of the buildings and the streets. So it's kind of funny, kind of circling back to the whole American thing. When you watch Brokeback Mountain, or you watch films that try to build on kind of Americana, or try and kind of build the myth of the American landscape, and it's actually Canadian landscapes and Canadian street scenes and Canadian buildings, that are kind of creating or helping, build up this American myth. To me, I find absolutely fascinating as well.
Yeah, I think you create a whole new level of tourism, like experience the real Americana in Canadian in Canada.
See, you're laughing, but at the same time, people will go to where the films were located in the narrative, not to where they were shot, to go experience those places.
Yeah.
And they're shocked when that diner isn't there, or they're shocked when that forest isn't there. That they're like,
Yeah, Jen, what's your Twilight example?
Yeah, exactly. From Forks, I think, is it Washington? Something, I don't know. Some small town in Washington when the Twilight series is set, but all the Twilight films were filmed in Vancouver. So after the books came out, the tourism in that town went up, but after the movies, it increased like 3,000% or something. So the town started to recreate things that were in the film. So they had to make these kind of Canadian sets in the town. So the
visitors,
the film fanatics would go to it, and they could stay in the house at Bella.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah.
Bella grew up.
I can't believe you.
Yeah.
So there's another project in there that we used to talk about. I think we're going to need a break, but collecting those kinds of stories and showing how the actual doubling works and what are the effects, not in the films, but in cities themselves.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then just a couple more questions. When you were doing your research, was there a film that didn't pretend to be an American city, that was totally authentic to its Canadian counterpart? And the only one that comes to mind for me is Chloe, because I know that was shot in Toronto and it was kept with the Toronto streetscape. But is there any ones that came to mind when you were doing your research?
I mean, a lot of Cronenberg's films don't necessarily.
Yeah, he's kind of ambiguous.
Yeah, located in Toronto, but they're very much about a version of or several versions of Toronto that he has in mind. So he certainly has found a way to, not all of his movies, obviously, but a few of his movies are very much set in what he would imagine Toronto to be, or what he feels Toronto is, without actually explicitly saying it. In the same way that Adam Abonian is exploring parts of Toronto as well.
Go ahead, Jen.
Oh, I was gonna say we stayed away from those films.
Yeah.
Because we were trying to find imposters.
Find the other ones.
There's a thing in Quebec filmmaking, so in French language filmmaking, where Montreal does play Montreal all the time. It's the big city, like Paris is in French films or New York is in American films. So that unfortunately left a lot of films out that we're pretty rigorous about. There's a few exceptions, but we're pretty rigorous about there are no cities playing themselves in the choices we ultimately made. People can have to go through and figure out which ones are faking it. But there is a whole film industry of Canadian filmmakers who use the cities. It's just a question of whether the big productions from elsewhere use our cities as they are.
But even within some of the filmmakers we spoke to, because Toronto is so expensive to film in, they're filming Hamilton to be Toronto. So there's even impostering within Canada.
There's some Winnipeg playing Toronto as well.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that new dimension.
Yeah.
The Canadian cities impostering the other Canadian cities.
Well, there's a great story about Queer as Folk. It was set in Philadelphia? No, Pittsburgh. Sorry, Pittsburgh. Yeah, and it was set in Church Street. Toronto was supposed to be Liberty Avenue in Pittsburgh, and then part of the storyline is the characters come to Toronto for a wedding, and they go to Church Street, but they couldn't use Church Street because Church Street was Liberty Avenue, so they had to use Yonge Street. So Yonge Street had to imposter Church Street.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's funny. So silly.
Okay, I think this will be my last question, but from the whole Impostering Cities, what buildings, if you were to create your own film that's trying to imposter another city, what elements would you bring in to Frankenstein your perfect character city?
That's a good question.
Seeing that
Well-
anything is possible now.
Tom and Jen just kind of did this for our inauguration party.
Yeah, actually, we did, but that was more kind of a greatest hits style.
Nick cutting out every building.
Pretty good. I think, unfortunately, my city might be mostly brutalist kind of buildings, which would be a horrible city to live in if it was just that. But I think that the ones that I like the most, or that would find the kind of easiest to work with, or that I would find the most fun to work with, would be this kind of great brutalist heritage that we have across the country, actually. That would be mine.
Jen, David?
David?
It's, yeah, I don't quite think of it quite that way. One of the things that I've learned is how good the filmmakers are at making films. It sounds silly, but they really know how to find not just the building, but the part of the building that will help tell their story or help frame a character or set something forward. So I don't even think you need an entire building. I think you need the spots that are really good to film in, and that you can get sometimes a kind of psychological density. Sounds a bit jargony, but they in the interviews you can hear people talking that quite a lot. Like they're having debates about the buildings not as architecture, but as kind of something that will immediately connect to a character, to an audience, a character to an audience. And I think that's something that architects sometimes talk about, the poetry of the building and how it affects you rather than something you rationally experience. But the filmmakers really know how to do that. And that's parts of buildings. So you would need the corridor from Roy Thompson Hall, and the corridors from Scarborough College, and the Stramp from Robson Square, and you would put all those places together that are quite different in real life than they are in the way that they're used in the films.
Very cool.
Yeah, like the John Wick is like that, right? He's in the underground in New York, and then he turns the corner and he's in Montreal, and then he turns another corner, he's back in New York, just because it was a great corridor for him to run down when he's covered in blood.
Yeah, and the corridor, which is the walk through, I was going to say it's an everyday place to go to. No one thinks of it as John Wickian. It's a vision of the filmmakers that that's what the architecture could be.
Very cool. I mean, I just thought of one more question, which is, seeing that filmmakers can do such good job evoking this emotion, do you think there's a future where the two of them, architects and filmmakers, can work together to create this, beautiful space or beautiful atmosphere for visitors moving forward, whether it's real or fake?
I think a lot of architects are already working in
Especially the younger ones kind
Yeah.
of bounce back and forth with the seasons.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'd like to think that most architects do try and create those kinds of moments, or set the scene, or imagine stories and narratives unfolding within certain spaces, different times of day, different seasons. I mean, there's a lot of, I won't say an infinite, but there's a lot of different possibilities for each space that we work on. And I think we try and imagine as much of it as possible. I think film is good at showing the potential of spaces. So you can look at the way filmmakers kind of reinterpret or rework. And for sure, you learn from that. I mean, it's been a huge learning experience for us, I think, watching all of these films and, dying to try some of these things out in our next projects, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, final question. What's next? What's next for everyone? What's coming up the
Rest.
pipeline?
Rest. Rest. Letting the rest of life catch up.
Nice.
Yes, it's been 3 years working on this project.
Yeah, it's a great project, and I hope it has legs. I hope we can do something more with it. But yeah, first a beer.
Yeah. Eventually, hopefully, a spritz, but that
Yes.
beer will have
Yes.
to.
I know I was about to say, because the Venice closes in November, right? So there's lots of potential to eventually go over there if the borders open up. Would that be something that you guys would be doing?
Yeah, I think there's a hope for kind of a second wave of
Openings or events.
events or kind of celebrations or convergence of curators and presenters and commissioners end of August, beginning of September. So keeping our fingers crossed for that.
Yeah, the jury will do their thing at the end of August. That's the plan. So that's a kind of natural time for a few ambassadors to show up and a few curators and designers and maybe some press. And it would be good for us, but it would also be good for the Biennale if there was a moment of true international participation. That would be, I would find that very helpful for the whole Biennale experience.
And, there's also a tradition of taking the exhibition when it comes back to Canada and trying to tour it as well. And I think ours lends itself very well in that there's a very physical aspect to it with the building wrap that then has this kind of memory of the pavilion or half of the pavilion that could then travel across Canada with the screening room and a very different kind of manifestation of the exhibition in a gallery space instead of in a garden, which kind of will take a little bit of reconfiguring our heads around, but
Yeah.
I think we can do it.
Well, that's very exciting. Well, do let us know if you guys go across the pond or if this comes back to Canada. And because I would really like to experience it like everyone else in its full glory.
Well, I'd say not full glory, but other glory.
Need the Venetian light.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that's what you need to do when it comes back. Just do the backdrop of Venice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for taking the time. I'm all done with my questions. Yeah. Unless there's any other closing remarks you guys want to do, but other than that, I can let you go back to your day.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation, and I hope people like it.
Yeah, me too. So I'll share it with you when I post it and do all my social.
Wonderful.
Sounds great.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.